A century ago, as it is today, the US was in the midst of a major transition. Americans were leaving the farms in droves and going to work in the factories. And it was during this tumultuous time that we crafted the new norms of work, namely the weekend, a 40-hour work week, and thankfully, the idea that children don't belong in factories. This was not the way work was done on the farms, but it is now the bedrock norms of how we work today. And our economy has changed again since then, but our social policy has not caught up. We need to update the social contract with norms that make sense for the way we work, both today and in the future. Let's take my father, for example. My father and mother recently moved to Colorado to pursue a dream of living near their first grandson. They packed up their earthly belongings into a U-Haul in Kansas and drove across the plains to start a new life in Colorado. When they arrived in Colorado, my father, who's a big bear of a man who squeezes the life out of you when he hugs you, hung out his shingle as a handyman. Now, he's a former preacher, and he's always been good at fixing and building things on the side, and now he's learning to build a business in the 21st century. He gets some of his work the old-fashioned way, through word of mouth or joining the Chamber of Commerce, but he's also found a cohort of customers from a new platform called Thumbtack. He works his own hours, he's his own boss, he's able to prioritize his life. But my father doesn't have an employer who's paying into workers' compensation or Social Security, nor does he have any paid time off or sick days. He's completely on his own. And in that way, my father looks a lot more like an Uber driver than meets the eye. Self-employed independent contractors, from nannies to gardeners to highly paid freelance computer engineers, all work outside of the employer-based social safety net, like Uber drivers. How do they get paid time off or parental leave? The answer is they don't. But support is growing around the idea of a portable, prorated, and universal social safety net. Imagine a system where each person had their own portable benefit account that employers and platforms paid into. This person could access their paid time off or sick leave, no matter if they're changing jobs or if they have several jobs at once. And for the era of platform work, where most people don't do full-time work on one platform, the contributions could be prorated. In my father's case, the platform he used could contribute into his sick days, for example. And momentum for portability is growing. Many point to the Affordable Care Act as the key first step in portability. I mean, my parents' risky move to Colorado without jobs was only possible in the era of Obamacare. Prior, a somewhat healthy 60-year-old unemployed person wouldn't have had access to health insurance and the mobility that comes along with that. But we have to go beyond health insurance, and it's starting to happen. Last fall, I helped organize a surprising group of 40 thought leaders, including platforms like Lyft, Instacart, Handy, Etsy, and Care.com, as well as prominent labor leaders like David Rolfe, Sarah Horowitz, Palak Shah, and Saket Soni, and many more, who were convened and drafted principles of a portable, prorated, and universal benefit system. And in January of this year, the president talked about it in his State of the Union, and just a few weeks ago, Senator Elizabeth Warren laid out a plan for portable benefits for the contingent workforce. But recently, we saw an entirely unlikely first mover, Uber. Uber recognized a new guild called the Independent Drivers Guild. The guild was formed by the machinists, the labor union that represents black car drivers here in New York. And it's possible that this 11th century guild may just be the biggest breakthrough in the 21st century gig economy fights to date. The guild has the potential to offer its members a range of benefits and protections, like access to retirement savings and more. And imagine if the guild representing drivers also represented people who work on Handy or Instacart, or my father, the handyman. While details are still being worked out, this first step matters because the world of contingent work is growing, and the future of contingent work shouldn't have to revolve around a false choice between security and flexibility. But this social policy is designed for today's contingent workers, for today's Uber drivers. What happens when the cars drive themselves? What do we do if the future involves fewer and fewer jobs? A recent McKinsey study points out that 45% of the tasks that people do currently could be automated using off-the-shelf technology that we have today. And even if you don't believe in the coming robot apocalypse, you've seen that the jobs we're adding aren't good jobs that with benefits that built the American middle class. They're minimum wage jobs in the service and retail sectors. But at the same time, the American economy is creating record levels of value. The top line up here is the American GDP over the last 40 years. The bottom line, American wages over the last 40 years. Where is that wealth going? Not to American workers. It's graphs like this and rampant inequality, as well as coming automation, that are causing many people to look for bigger and bolder solutions to the coming future of work questions. And some are turning to the old idea of the universal basic income for the answer. This is an unconditional cash grant to everyone. It's like in the game of Monopoly. When you pass go, every time you pass go, you get $200. Because the truth is, you need cash to play the game. Most versions of the universal basic income have two things in common. One, it's income, meaning it is money that you get that does not come from a paycheck. And two, is that it's universal, meaning everyone gets it, not just those below a certain poverty line. The thinking goes that universal programs like Social Security are much more popular, and therefore they have greater social investment. But this big new idea getting lots of headlines right now is actually an old one.
That is a great deal that the society can and must do if the Negro is to gain the economic security that he needs. Now, one of the answers, it seems to me, is a guaranteed annual income, a guaranteed minimum income for all people and for all families of our country.
This is probably the one thing Martin Luther King Jr. and Richard Nixon agreed on, or Thomas Paine. From founding fathers to Facebook co-founders, this big idea has captured imaginations throughout the ages. Let's look at two examples in the United States. The first is in Alaska. In the 1970s, oil was discovered in the Alaskan Northern Slope, and the state invested the profit into an Alaskan permanent fund. Today, that fund pays a yearly dividend of between $1,000 and $3,000 to every single resident in the state, debited directly into their account with no conditions. This dividend is so popular that even conservatives, such as former Governor Palin, have increased it during tough economic times. But another important idea here is Social Security. Created to eliminate poverty among elderly people in this country, it's a monthly check that is extremely popular across both sides of the aisle, prompting many to call the universal basic income Social Security for all. And over in Switzerland, they are moving this big idea into policy. Last Sunday, the country voted in the first referendum in the world to create a universal basic income of around $2,500 a month. And while it lost, and it lost handily, the young activists spent years of campaigning creatively on this topic, which forced the conversation globally to an entirely new level. And the numbers show that there was significant support among millennials for this idea at the ballot box. And that's important, because millennials may very well be the way that this moves from an idea in the history books to innovative social policy. And we're already seeing this to be true. The millennials at Y Combinator, the most prestigious startup accelerator in the Valley, have launched a pilot to just give out money to folks in Oakland, California, and determine what happens when people have an income. They'll look at cortisol levels for stress, spending habits, educational choices, etc. And thought leaders are starting to take this old idea and update it for today's moment. Dorian Warren at the Roosevelt Institute is mixing the movement for Black Lives' call for reparations, given the racialized economic inequality historically in this country, with the idea of a universal basic income to create a new idea around targeted universalism. But it's not just the kids. The older establishment has started signaling support too, including former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, and Andy Stern, the former head of the Service Employees Union, who has a new book out on the topic just this week. You know, the idea of the universal basic income allows us to imagine a world where we could embrace the coming automation. It would free us up to do what we want, or do what we need, or to do democracy, as our founding fathers hoped. Some have called the idea of the universal basic income the ultimate seed capital, like entrepreneurs have for pursuing a vision, or the ultimate strike fund, which would allow a worker to walk off a job that they don't like. You know, I think this saying is very true, that change is inevitable, but progress is not. While updating our social contract for the ultimate portability with the universal basic income will absolutely take a lot of work. I mean, it's a generational shift. It's worth remembering that we've been here before as a nation. Just as when we moved from the farms to the factories, we updated our norms of work, now is our moment to renew the social contract for the next generation, both for my father, the handyman, and for the grandson for whom he moved to Colorado. Thank you.